We'll read now theory of separation of powers. Theory of separation of powers. This theory was given by French philosopher Montesquieu. So what this theory is saying, what Montesquieu is saying is that the three organs of the state, that is legislature, executive and judiciary, shall be separated from each other into an watertight arrangement. That means they should be separated from each other. Their area of influence will be completely different. That means legislature, the task of the legislature will be only to make law. The task of executive will be only to implement those laws, and task of judiciary will be to impart justice. Now, why this theory is important? This theory is important because it safeguards the liberty of an individual. So, theory of separation of power was given by French philosopher Montesquieu, who is saying that the three organs of the state, legislature, executive and judiciary, there should be an watertight arrangement. They should be separated from each other. And this is important, this theory is important to safeguard the liberty of an individual. Now, we'll take two forms of government. One is parliamentary form of government and another one is presidential form of government. And we will check whether this theory of separation of power is applicable to both the form of the government or not. In presidential form of government, let's take for example USA. In USA, they follow theory of separation of power and they follow strict separation of power. That means legislature, executive and judiciary, there is no overlap. If you take the example of USA, then Article 1 talks about that the laws will be made by the US Congress. That means legislative task is with the US Congress. The executive power is with the president, that is mentioned in Article 2. And Article 3 talks about providing justice through judiciary. Now let's take parliamentary form of government, that is for example India or UK. So in India, yes, we follow theory of separation of power, but we do not follow strict separation of power. For example, the three organs of the state, there is no separation of power between legislature and executive. For example, let's take Prime Minister or any minister in India who is part of executive, he is also a part of legislature. Although there is a provision that one can become a minister or an executive even though he or she is not a legislature, but that validity is up to 6 months. So after 6 months, he or she has to become part of legislature. So in India, if you are part of executive, then you have to be a member of legislature. That means legislature and executive, between these two, there is no separation of power. But between executive and judiciary, there is theory of separation of power that we follow. And Article 50 of Indian Constitution also talks about that. Now we'll read doctrine of separation of power. Now we'll read doctrine of checks and balances. Let me tell you, India has accepted this doctrine of checks and balances. So what this doctrine of checks and balances is saying is that the three organs of the state, that is legislature, executive and judiciary, the three organs of the states keep a check on each other and maintains a balance. That means legislature, executive and judiciary exercise some form of control over each other, and through this the three organs maintain a balance among each other and impose responsibility on each other also. So this is doctrine of checks and balances. Now in India, the executive is checked by legislature. How? Legislature asks question to the executive in the floor of parliament, in question hour, in 0 hour, or there are other instruments through which executive can be controlled. For example, no confidence motion. So there are various tools through which executive can be controlled. Executive can be kept under check. Now, judiciary also keeps a check on legislature. Legislature passes laws. Whether those laws are constitutional or not, whether those laws are following the provisions of the constitution or not, judiciary keeps a check on the laws passed by the legislature. Judiciary also keeps a check on the action taken by executive. Now, who keeps a check on judiciary? Judges are appointed by the executive, that means president, and also judges are removed by president provided a resolution has been passed in the parliament. So India follow both the theory of separation of power and doctrine of checks and balances, although India do not follow strict separation of power, as India follows the parliamentary form of government. Now we will read different types of majorities. Let's start with absolute majority. So what is absolute majority? Absolute majority is the majority of more than 50% of total strength of the house. So absolute majority is a majority of more than 50% of the total strength of the house. Let's take an example and let's understand. So let's take the example of Lok Sabha. In Lok Sabha, the total strength available with Lok Sabha is 543. So in Lok Sabha, 543 MPs are there. So more than 50% of 543 means if you divide 543 by 2, you will get 271.5. That means absolute majority in this case is 272. And let me tell you, this majority is used to form the government. And this absolute majority is constant. This absolute majority number is always constant. Now, why absolute majority number is constant? Because the number of total strength is constant. So as the total strength is constant, hence absolute majority is constant. That means as for Lok Sabha, always the total strength is 543, hence absolute majority in this case will always be 272. Now we will read simple majority. So simple majority is the majority of more than 50% of the members present and voting. Let's take the example of Lok Sabha again and let's understand simple majority. So for Lok Sabha, the total strength is 543. Now let's assume in a particular day of Lok Sabha sitting, only 500 MPs are present. So only 500 MPs are present. And out of these 500 MPs, let's assume 100 MPs abstain from voting. That means they do not vote. For any reason, they are not voting. They are not taking part in the voting process. That means 500 MPs are present in a particular day, in a particular sitting of Lok Sabha, and out of those 500 MPs, 100 MPs abstain from voting. That means they are not, although they are present, but they are not voting. That means, what is the number of MPs that are present plus voting is 400 because 500 MPs are present in a particular day and 100 MPs abstain from voting. They are not voting. So only 400 MPs are present and voting. So what is the simple majority here? So 400 by 2, that is 200. That means 201 is the simple majority. So simple majority is the majority of more than 50% of the members present and voting. Let's take the example of Lok Sabha, where the total strength is 543. Let's on a particular day only 500 MPs are present. But out of the 500 MPs who are present, 100 MPs are not taking part in the voting process. That means 100 MPs are present but they are not voting. So we will not calculate them. So for us, the present and voting number is 400. And now this is our base and we have to calculate 50% with respect to this 400. So more than 50% means more than 200, that means 201 is the simple majority. Now we will read effective majority. So effective majority is the majority of more than 50% of effective strength. So what is effective strength? Effective strength is nothing but total strength minus vacancies. Now this vacancy can be due to death, can be due to resignation, or can be due to disqualification. Let's take the example of Lok Sabha. So in Lok Sabha, the total strength is 543. So 543. And let's assume due to any of the reasons, death, resignation or disqualification, at a particular time there is vacancy of 43. Let's assume. So then effective strength is 500. So then what will be the effective majority? More than 50% of effective strength. So effective strength now becomes 500. So 500 by 2, that is 250. That means more than 50% of effective strength means 251 is required for effective majority. Now we will read special majority. So one type of special majority is that more than 2/3 of the total membership of the house. So this is more than 2/3 of the total membership of the house. So for Lok Sabha, this is 543. So 2/3 of 543 means 362. That means special majority here is 363. And one of the example is impeachment of the president. Now, there is another type of special majority where majority required is 2/3 of the members present and voting and majority of the total membership of the house. So that is more than 2/3 of the members present and voting and also absolute majority. So both the criteria have to be met for a bill to be passed through this special majority. Now let's take one example. So in Lok Sabha, the total strength is 543. Let's assume in a particular sitting of Lok Sabha, only 500 members are present and out of the 500 members, only 400 members are voting. That means 400 members are present and voting. So what is the 2/3 of 400? So that is more than 266. That means more than 2/3 of the member present and voting is required. That means 267. And let's assume that 267 members have voted in favor of a particular bill. So 400 members are present and voting and 267 members, that is more than the 2/3 of the members present and voting, are voting in favor of a particular bill. But let me tell you, then also that bill will not be passed through this special majority because this criteria is not met. So what is absolute majority? Absolute majority for Lok Sabha is 272. But here 267 members are giving vote in favor of a bill to pass that bill. but absolute majority is also required, which is not met, so the bill will not be passed. Let's take another example. The total strength of Lok Sabha is 543, and let's assume that all the 543 members are present and they are also voting. Now let's assume 272 members vote in favor of a particular bill. So absolute majority criteria is met, but 272 is not more than 2/3 of the members present and voting, because in this case all the 543 members are present and voting. So 2/3 of the members present and voting in case of 543 is 363, but only 272 members are voting in favor of a particular bill. So that bill will not be passed through this special majority. And let's take another example. Lok Sabha total strength is 543. On a particular day, let's assume 500 members are present and voting, and there is a particular bill which has to be passed through this special majority. And let's assume that bill is supported by, let's assume, 400 members. Then in that scenario, that bill will be passed through this special majority, because 400 is more than 2/3 of 500, because 2/3 of 500 is 333, so more than this is 334 is required. So this criteria is met, and absolute majority criteria is 272. So 334, that means more than 2/3 of the present and voting, and the bill is getting 400 votes in favor of it. So 400 is greater than 334, and also 400 is greater than 272. So in this scenario, the bill will be passed through this type of special majority, where both the criteria are needed to be met. That means more than 2/3 of the members present and voting and absolute majority.